Reddit. What is your creepy story of living alone or being alone in the house? My fiance and I purchased a foreclosed home in a not so great neighborhood a few years back. We ignored the area because of the great price but now realize we were idiots because of things like this. I'm lying in bed, barely awake while watching TV. Fiance is still at work so I can't sleep. It's 2 am and I'm barely dozing to the crime show that was on when I hear scratching at the window. The window that was 1 foot away from me while lying in bed. I remember thinking damned squirrels when I heard the squirrels start cursing and mumbling. Then the sound of a screwdriver lifting the window frame starts up. I start screaming bloody murder that I have a gun and I'm calling the cops. The scratching noises stopped and by the time the cops got to my door and searched the yard, there was no one there. Thinking oh great, they think I'm crazy. I thank them and as they're walking back to their cruisers, their radios all started going off at once that there was another break-in reported in my neighborhood. The officers go scrambling off and I slam the door and lock it, once again. Freaking out, I go get back in the bed to wait for fiance to get home. He calls on his way and wants me to stay on the phone with him until he gets here. I hear loud footsteps on the wooden shed ramp in our backyard and say, oh good, you're home and hang up. Walking to the back door, he called me straight back and told me he still wasn't even in the neighborhood so once again, I'm calling 911 and losing my crap. He and the cops got there at the same time and searched the yard again. Apparently, they'd been getting calls all night about some M-head trying to break into the same few houses all night with a screwdriver. They'd been one step behind him the whole night and had cruisers everywhere. Oh, and the cursing at the window? One of the officers went to the bedroom window and saw the screen removed. Meth Wiz had disturbed a huge wasp nest when he took the screen off and my tiny little wasp defenders saved the day. Yes, we are currently house hunting. This is sadly not a one-off. Rural Ohio here. This kind of stuff is turning the entire state into a bad neighborhood except most people are looking to steal stuff to fund H habits. M addicts are crazy, and H addicts are a kind of desperate no sober person can imagine. Both culminate in horrifying experiences. Over this past summer, I was living alone in my apartment in a relatively safe college town. I was always paranoid and locked the door anytime I got home from somewhere, especially since I'm a female living somewhere alone. One morning I woke up to go to the bathroom, and as I'm in there, I hear the front door creak open. Obviously scared, I carefully leave the bathroom and look around the corner to see the front door open about 6 inches. I slowly check the apartment for intruders only to find nothing. Somehow the door was unlocked while I was sleeping and opened by what I choose to call the wind. Needless to say, for the rest of the time I was alone in the apartment I had my knife close by. Get a slide lock. Also, I always keep a string of bells hanging off my front door knob, so it always makes a sound when the door is closed. I was looking after my mother's house for a week while she was on holiday. She had 2 cats that come in and out the house via a cat flap. Very nice animals, always cuddly and playful even when they were old. So I get woken up in the middle of the night by loud meows from downstairs. I thought maybe the cat flap was stuck and they wanted to get out. I go downstairs to check and open the hallway door and there are at least 15 black cats sitting in the hallway staring back at me. Then I see my mother's cats sat amongst them just chilling and meowing happily. I left them all to it and they were gone in the morning. One of us. Last year I was renting a house in a small, economically depressed old mining town in Appalachia. I lived alone. On one of the first warm nights of spring, I awoke at around 4 am to the sound of my doorknob turning. I figured someone must have the wrong address, but it kept turning, persistently. I didn't have a peephole or window to see who was outside, so I just approached the door from inside and yelled wrong place, buddy. Then the door started shaking violently, and a hand began punching it. I tried one last time, wrong place, go away, man. Someone on the other side growled at me and started making horrifying noises like a wild animal. I grabbed a kitchen knife and called the police, then waited inside. About 10 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I opened it cautiously to see an officer who questioned me about the incident. Then he asked me to close it again and remain inside. Again, I couldn't see what was happening out there, so I just turned out the lights and waited quietly with the knife in my hand. For about 20 minutes. There was just silence. Then, out of nowhere, my living room window screen started to get pushed inside and the curtain started to move. The guy was pushing out the screen and trying to climb inside. I held up the knife and yelled, "I'm gonna kill you," in my most threatening voice possible. Thankfully, I immediately heard, "Get on the ground. Show me those hands." Heard another horrible wail from outside as the guy was presumably tackled and taken to a police car. A few minutes later, another knock at the door. The officer was back to tell me that the suspect had been captured. This guy was a uniformed cop, but he was visibly trembling and super pale. I still hadn't seen what the intruder looked like. The next day, I ran into the officer while he was off duty. Small town. And he told me that the suspect had told them his name was Jason Voorhees. Probably a REM addict or some other type of drug user. Those habits don't go well with delusions involving slasher film characters. Rural Appalachia. Yeah, it was him. This happened about 8 years ago. I was about 14 and was playing COD with my best friends at the time. My parents, who are usually quite adamant about me not staying home alone, had to go pick up my grandparents from the airport. My brother, who usually is home with me, had a party to go to. So here I was home alone, with my PlayStation and pizza I ordered. Score. My friend and I were still playing at 2 AM when I hear the doorbell go off. I think, oh, must be my parents. They must have forgotten the garage remote. I walk to open the door but a gut feeling stops me. That's when this dude goes berserk. He begins to pound on the door and screams to let him in. I, in my panic, have frozen in place, but I managed to get the house phone to call 000, our equivalent to 911. I also call my parents, because I'm 14 and I'm freaking out. The friend I was playing COD with can hear this entire thing through my headset and I haven't responded to him yet. So I'm juggling my phone call to the emergency services as well as my parents. I hang up with my parents and that's when the banging stops. I think, thank God maybe he's moved on. As I continue to talk to the phone operator, I begin to hear the loudest bangs I've ever heard. He's trying to break a window to get in. He's still screaming to let him in. By now, I've called police and I was ready to accept my fate when I hear a commotion and my older brother opening the door. Turns out the dude grabbed a statue and was banging on the window with that. It still blows my mind that the window did not break. My brother and his friends threw him down our stairs. Coincidentally, that's when the police also showed up. Turns out the guy was a shirtless 20-year-old that was high on a hallucinogenic drug and he bolted from a party down the road after being caught having sex with the birthday girl by the parents. The paramedics were called and by this time we had given him a blanket and warm water. The paramedics told us if he were outside for another hour he would have died of hypothermia. We declined to press charges. His parents came and apologized profusely. They've never bothered us again. TLDR. Some drugged up dude tried to break into my house while my 14-year-old self was home alone. I love that you threw him down the stairs and then gave him a blanket and water. This happened in the 70s in Australia. I was about 14. Mum and dad and the other kids had gone somewhere and I was alone in the house, out in the suburbs surrounded by bushland. At night, I was reading books in my bedroom when I noticed a bit of noise. I could only just barely hear it, but there was definitely a noise. Sounded like it was coming from inside the house. But the TV was off and we didn't have a radio. Suddenly everything was scary. A moment ago I was having a good time. Now everything felt wrong. I put my book down and crept as silently as I could out into the hallway. Lucky my door was open because the bloody thing creaked. Once out in the hallway the noise became clearer. I still couldn't quite figure out what it was, but it was definitely not my imagination. Sounded like it was coming from the kitchen, and the only way there was through the living room. So I took a breath and crept round the corner of the hallway and into the living room. I'm on the balls of my feet and trying to avoid making any noise. Now I'm here, I can see the living room is empty, but the noise is louder still. It's definitely coming from the kitchen, and even worse, I can now tell what the noise is. It's two voices, and they are having a whispered argument. Now I am seriously scared. The only explanation I can think of is robbers. I spent about 5 minutes just standing stock still in the living room before deciding to try and peek around the corner into the kitchen. So as quietly as I can I creep towards the corner. I'm moving very slowly. I've even got my mouth open in case my breath gives me away. I reach the corner and just stick one eye around, and the kitchen is empty, but I can still hear the voices, and they are louder than ever. I can almost make out what they're arguing about now. Again I stand there. This time I am telling myself I don't believe in ghosts, and I didn't. And yet how the frick can two invisible men be having an argument in the kitchen? In the end I start to move again, because I know if I don't do this I won't be sleeping tonight. I creep into the kitchen and realize the voices are coming from the stove. Now this was in the 70s before stoves had those solid tops you have nowadays. Instead they had a steel coil. I bend down and put my ear close and discover the voices are coming from where the metal coil joins some electrical plug before going back inside the stove. The voices are indeed two people arguing. They're on some kind of radio talk show. When my parents came home I showed the other kids how if you put your ear down real close to the stovetop you could hear radio. I'm 55 now and this is still the most frightened I've been in my life. Best part about this is how you refer to your siblings, aka your parents' other offspring, as the other kids. I had to reread it to make sure I didn't miss out a part where you mentioned it was a group home orphanage. I was 15 and my parents and I just moved into a house in a brand new development. My parents were at work so I was doing what almost every teenagers do when school's out, sleeping late. It was maybe 11 when I woke up. I was on my way to the bathroom when I came face to face with a guy. Surprised he ran out. A couple of minutes later, a knock on the door. It was the contractor apologizing for his guy. Apparently he was using our restroom and he didn't know someone had moved in. The furniture should have been a clue. My parents were furious and they changed the locks. Years ago my parents had their garage converted into an extra large bedroom. It's full of junk now, and this was where we all played games. I was about 10 and it was only the second or third time I had been left alone in the house while my siblings were all away for one reason or another. Naturally, I was up all night playing on our PS2 in there, having a blast. I don't know how late but pretty late into it, I suddenly started hearing someone tapping on the window. They really went all out with the extra bedroom and actually replaced the garage door with a wall, window, and traditional front door you'd find on any house, complete with bolt and doorknob locks. Well, I didn't realize it was a sound not produced by my game for a full minute or so, and the sound, like someone drumming their fingers 1, 2, 3, 4 1, 2, 3, 4 really quickly, kept going without stopping. I finally really noticed it when the doorknob rattled and the sound moved to the door, which made it louder. I freaked right the heck out and snuck to the door to double check the locks. They were both unlocked, but the door tended to jam and act like it was locked unless you put a lot of effort into it. I locked both locks, loudly, so the person would know they definitely couldn't get in, but I just heard a gruff older man laugh and the sound got louder. Then he moved back to the window and called in, "Let me in, love, I'm cold and hungry. Don't you wanna be nice to your neighbor?" I turned out the light, ran to my room, and hid in the pitch dark under my blanket until my parents got home a few hours later from their anniversary date. I never told them because I was young enough to care more about getting in trouble because I stayed up past my bedtime. TLDR. I stayed up late alone playing PS2 and a creepy old man, possibly homeless, tried to get into my house. Possibly homeless, definitely a vampire. My dad built me a room in the basement as a kid. It was awesome to have privacy. When I was young it was scary, but the usual stuff. Hum glow of the furnace, hearing creaks in the ceiling above, the occasional spider that haunted my dreams. But normal stuff I got over. Fast forward to university, still had the room and would sleep in it when I went home weekends, holidays or whenever. Started to experience the craziest crap when I'd be home. What I'd recognize as creaks when I was a kid sounded like full-on footsteps upstairs when I was sure no one else was home. I'd investigate and nothing, but I'd go back and they'd return, so I was sure I wasn't alone but could never find anyone home. But I'd find random things sometimes, like soup cooking boiling over on the stove. Then I started to notice crap moving around my room without me noticing. I'd be playing video games, put the controller down, turn to answer message on the computer, turn back and the controller would be gone from where I put it and the game turned off. I seriously believed in ghosts for a bit. Then comes the thing I really had to be scared about. It was that the furnace was broken and spewing carbon monoxide. If it had been now I would have recognized the famous Reddit story, but back then no idea. I could have died. That's the scary part. CO gas is some trippy stuff. When I was 12 my bedroom was across the hall from my dad's office. I had a habit of staying up late reading at the time. One night I was reading while everyone else was asleep, and I suddenly heard this bizarre sound coming from dad's office. It sounded like the window in his office sliding back and forth. At 12, when you're reading fantasy books, the first assumption you'll likely make is robbers. I had a dowel rod in my room, so I grabbed that and cautiously began creeping towards dad's office. Now, I was properly freaking out. My heart is at full throttle, and I can barely hear past the thumping, but I can still hear that weird sound. Just as I began reaching for the doorknob to charge in, there's a hand on my shoulder. It was Dad. His bedroom was downstairs and he heard me walking around. Came up to investigate. Turns out the sound was his printer. He was working on a report downstairs and printed it out from his laptop. He was proud that I was ready to deal with whatever was in his office, but found it extremely funny that I was going to run at his printer with a wooden dowel. Fantasy books equals robbers. LOL. More like trolls. I was slapped hard while I was asleep. Woke up with my cheek hurting and ears ringing. I lived alone at that time. Another less creepy, after the fact, story I remember was when I was crashing at my uncle's for a couple months in summer, while he was at work, and sometimes at night, I would hear a woman yelling, "Hey, you there?" At first I was very freaked out, but a couple times during daytime, I'd look for the source and try and talk to her, and she never replied. I asked my uncle after a few days and it turns out it was the pet parrot of the guy who lived across the hall. I had heard him before making weird noises and screeching, but never had I ever imagined it could replicate a woman's voice like that. But yeah, I did see him do that in person sometime later, so nothing paranormal there at least. One time someone flicked me on the forehead while I slept, alone. Then I remembered we were currently having a mouse problem and it was probably a tiny mouse that ran headfirst into my face and scared itself. Which is kind of cute but also left me with trouble sleeping. I spent 6 months living alone in a cabin near the end of a dirt road in central New Hampshire. Nearest neighbors were a quarter mile or so up or down the road. It's an area where people definitely keep to themselves. Had all sorts of animal visitors, bears on the porch, you name it, but never random people around. One morning, I went out to my car to go to work. It was spring, and we'd had a late frost. On the rear window of my truck, someone had written, "I watch you," with their finger in the frost. I never had an actual problem in the rest of my time there, but that freaked me the frick out. I wonder if it's possible that someone had written that on your car at some previous time, like at the store trying to be funny, and the oils caused the window not to frost in those spots, so you didn't notice it till then. No joke. It was scary then but funny now. Next door are drug addicts and one night my mum was at work and I was falling asleep when I heard a loud thumping. I ignored it at first but it got more persistent and it turned into loud banging sounds and were getting louder and then the screaming started, so I started to get scared and with my phone in my hand went to the window and looked outside. One of my neighbors had a manic look in his eyes and was outside with a large tree branch in his hand banging on my and his girlfriend's windows with it whilst screaming at the top of his lungs and doing a weird tribal dance. At this point I was petrified and frozen when he suddenly stopped and looked up at my window still with the manic look on his face and saw me, and we stared at each other for about 10 seconds, then he dropped his stick and went back into his house. I was scared the rest of the night and was jumpy at any noise. I only fell asleep when my mum got home. This is only one of the many creepy things that has happened to me since moving to the area. So it's not really creepy but it was weird. I moved into my place a couple years ago. 2 weeks into it, there's a little flower necklace in my mailbox one day. Alright, whatever. I throw it out and keep on trucking. Next day I came home and there's a pair of sunglasses that looked female to me but could probably work for either party, and a note that basically says, "Hey, I think you'd look good in these. You should wear them next time we're together. Blah blah." So clearly this person probably just thinks I'm somebody else. Again, I ignore it, keep everything as evidence if needed and move on. 3 days later, I come home and check my mail expecting there to be something. Nope. Okay, cool. They fricked off. Head up to my door and there's panties hanging on the doorknob. Okay. I'm fairly uncomfortable because they've now come up to my place instead of the group mailboxes downstairs. This means they know which apartment I'm in. Pretty sure it's all still a big misunderstanding, so I write a note and put it on my door that basically says, hey, I don't know who you are, but you need to stop. I'm not whoever you think I am. Everything stops. A year later to the day, I come home and find another flower necklace in my mailbox. I took it out, ripped it up, threw it in the nearby trash can and went upstairs. Nothing since then. Once, when I was around 12, I was home alone and taking a bath. I was rinsing my hair underwater and when I lifted my head and I realized I could suddenly hear what sounded like footsteps walking across the landing. Both my parents were at work, and I knew it was far too early for them to be home. So I was entirely freaked out and convinced that someone had broken into the house and was walking around stealing crap or whatever. I had no idea what to do at all. I was so freaked out. I was sat in the bath, naked, with no phone or any method of calling for help, freaking out that surely the intruders were going to find me, or even worse, they already knew I was there, because surely they would have heard the noise of the water from me moving in the bath. I essentially froze and sat there and panicked for who knows how long before I decided to have a moment of bravery. I figured that they knew I was there anyway, so I waited for a gap in the noise that to me signaled they had gone into a room and opened the bathroom door a crack so I could see what was actually happening. I opened it and waited. Soon, the noise of the footsteps began again on the landing, and from my vantage point I could see the entire landing. There was no one there. No one had broken into the house. Later, when my parents got home, I asked them about it. It turns out, after they looked into it, it was a problem with the pipes, causing them to make a banging noise that sounded like footsteps. 99% of the time, it's the dang pipes. This happened last week. I was sleeping in bed and suddenly woke up like something had made me jump. I saw the outline of a person, too dark to see anything else, standing next to my bed and assumed it was my boyfriend. I laughed and said, oh my god, you scared me, and he got into my bed. I reached out my arms to hug him, and I felt nothing. It's not as scary as some of these other stories, but at the time I was terrified. Go on. Alone in my aunt and uncle's house in rural Ireland. It was winter time and about 6 PM in the evening, so dark outside. I wasn't expecting them back for another hour or two. Was playing Commandos on their PC all day, and as it grew dark I hadn't bothered to turn on any lights. Get up to go pee and don't bother turning on any lights. As I'm pee I hear a vehicle come up the gravel lane. Finish up and go look out the window. It is a white van. I see 3 men get out of the van. I drop to the floor and immediately start crawling towards my aunt and uncle's bedroom. I open their wardrobe and crawl into it. It's a huge old oak wardrobe. I throw some cloths over myself and hide there. All I can think of is gypsies are here to rob the place. I very softly hear them speaking outside, doing that loudish whisper to each other. Someone tries the front door, but thankfully it's locked. I hear them talk and walk around the side of the house. I think I hear the back door being open, but remember it's locked. Then for a long time I hear nothing. After what felt like a lifetime I hear another vehicle come up the lane. It stops and out gets my uncle. He begins talking to the men, shouting, but I can't hear what he is saying. My mind races thinking something bad is going to happen. Then I hear laughing and chatting. I crawl out of the wardrobe and peek out the window. My uncle clearly knows these men and is having a friendly chat. Even though no one can see me, I go red with embarrassment. I go back to the PC and sit there embarrassed. Honestly, you still probably did the right thing. Self-preservation is a good natural instinct. About 2 weeks ago my depression was kicking my butt, so I decided to cancel my evening plans and just lie down for a nap. Shortly after sunset I heard loud pounding on the front door alternating with rapid doorbell ringing. In the back of my head I thought was being aggressive, but I still felt like crap, so I ignored the noise. About 10 minutes later I heard a loud thump in the kitchen and assumed my cat had knocked something over. I got up from bed and was about to open the door to the bedroom when I saw beams from a flashlight underneath the door. I called out, hello, and the light disappeared. I walked into the kitchen and noticed the door was still locked but ajar, and my cat was standing at the top of the basement steps looking down into the darkness. At that point I received notification from my partner, who was out of state for work, that something had tripped the motion sensor camera in the kitchen. 2 men had broken into the house and it was unclear where they had gone once they went back out the kitchen door. I called 911 and 5 officers and a canine unit were at the house within minutes. They sent the dog into the basement and it didn't find anybody. The would-be burglars hadn't had enough time to take anything but my sense of security. But it wasn't until I was telling my co-workers the story the next day that it started to hit me how much worse it could have been. November sucked this year. I'm so grateful it is finally a new month. In late 2015 I was laid off from my job zoo and was staying with my grandparents for a couple months. My grandparents have 2 little dogs, and because grandpa worked nights and grandma was away in Texas for a month, they were really glad to have someone around to feed and walk the dogs during the day. One night when I'm home alone I'm relaxing in the tub when, through the skylight in the bathroom, I can hear whispered hushed voices that can only be coming from the back porch. I think I must be hearing things, but then both dogs start barking their heads off. My blood runs freezing cold, and I leap out of the bath, pull my clothes on, and run to the porch door, but whoever was there was already gone. I took a shovel and walked the perimeter of the house but found nothing. After that grandpa updated the security system. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.